Well, thank you everybody for being here. We're really grateful to 4 candidates running for CD15 for their attendance tonight. Anthony Santich, Bryant Odega, Danielle Sandoval, and Tim McOsker. So to kick things off, we are going to give just 5 minutes of a little bit of context and history on previous plans the city has done and how that's gone. We'll go into candidate opening statements. Each candidate will get 2 minutes apiece. We'll go into some curated questions. That will be 1.5 minutes per candidate to answer. And then we'll do audience Q&A. And we actually shortened this to 60 seconds from 90 seconds because we have a lot higher attendance now and we want to get through as many audience questions as possible. And then each candidate will have 2 minutes of candidate closing statements. So I'll start with the context and history. Talking about plans and mobility. Our city really loves plans. In 1977, the first bike plan came out. It was 673 miles, and we got 5 miles of it done in about 20 years. There was a 1996 bike plan that came out. It was 1,680 miles, and that one we did a little better, 104 miles installed in 14 years. Then there was a 2010 bike plan, almost the same number of miles as 96, 1684, basically the same plan, got another 100 miles done. And then in 2015, City Council passed the Mobility Plan 2035, which has 500 miles of bike lanes. So we're scaling down our ambitions now, and we've done 37 miles to date. So our city loves plans. We do the best plans and best studies, and we're just not that great at implementation. Specific to bike lanes, this is how the sausage is made behind the scenes. First of all, the pavement has to be perfect. When is the pavement ever perfect in Los Angeles? It's really only perfect right when you repave the street. So the opportunity is during repaving. The council office has to be interested. Our city does not automatically implement its own plan when they repave streets. There has to be interest from the council office. The council office then says, all right, this is what I want you to do for outreach. It's somewhat arbitrary. LADOT can spend anything from a few months to years making the council office happy. And then if and when the council office signs off, the project is implemented. This is a block by block approach that is just really broken. So this is what the mobility plan looks like citywide. There are 500 miles of bike lanes, as I mentioned. The light green is where those bike lanes go. The dark green in this map is what's actually been implemented. So again, out of 500 miles planned, 37 miles have been implemented. There's also 208 miles of bus-only lanes that are planned in the city on the right-hand side. There's only 0.3 miles of those in CD15, but 208 citywide, and only 30 miles of those have been implemented. Specific to CD15, there's 22 miles of protected bike lanes planned, and 1.4 miles have been implemented. You could see the map on the left. These include streets like Imperial Highway, Central Vermont, 190th, Western, Anaheim, Gaffey, Palos Verdes, Harbor, and 25th. And then on the right-hand side, you can see the 0.3 miles of bus lanes. It's this tiny little stub of Vermont that goes into CD15. It has not been implemented. CD15 is also pretty dangerous for people. The high entry network is the map of streets that the city has created. It's 6% of our city streets that account for 70% of the injuries and deaths in the city. And as you can see, Watts and Wilmington and the Harbor area is on the high entry network. I'm now going to play a very quick video about our ballot measure effort to try to change all this. Here we go.
LA has the worst traffic in the country, and we lose $19 billion a year in lost productivity because of it. Our air is so dirty that breathing it is the equivalent of smoking up to 4 cigarettes per day. Our streets are also dangerous. A majority of Angelenos feel unsafe crossing the street, and a pedestrian is killed every 3 days. But the average trip in the city of Los Angeles is only 3 miles. There's a huge opportunity to get people out of their cars if we just gave them the infrastructure to do so. In 2015, LA City Council passed a mobility plan that's full of over 1,500 miles of improvements for pedestrians, cyclists, transit riders, and drivers. But 7 years in, we've implemented only 3% of the improvements. At that rate, it will take over 200 years to fully implement. Healthy Streets LA is a ballot measure that would mandate that the city implement its own mobility plan anytime it repaves the streets. It would both save money and dramatically speed up the implementation of safer, more multimodal streets. You deserve a city where it's safe to cross the street, or use a bike, where it's efficient to take the bus, and where roads are reserved for those that need to drive the most. Learn more at healthystreetsla.com, and let's change the city together.
So we're well on our way to turning in 100,000 signatures to the city clerk. And as council member, this may come up to council. So wanted to let you know about the effort. All right. We are now ready for candidate opening statements. The list of the 4 candidates is here, as you can see, in alphabetical order. So basically, each slide will rotate to the next person. So Anthony will kick us off here, followed by Bryant, and so on. And we don't want to be policemen here, but please respect the timer. We would appreciate it. You don't have to take the whole time either. So Anthony, whenever you're ready, please go ahead.
Okay. My name is Anthony Santich. I live in San Pedro, where I was born and raised. I've worked in the port as an executive for 20 years, and 13 of those in Wilmington. My family came here as fishermen and cannery workers in the 30s from Italy and Croatia. My dad was senior class president of San Pedro High in 1955, and 24 years later, I was senior class president of San Pedro High in 1979. So I tell you that so you know I have deep roots in the community, and I know that I can change things for the better in the district, and I think it starts with this mobility plan. So you know, I look at those stats that you presented, and I have to shake my head and wonder why we keep electing the same people that haven't done really anything for almost 30 years. And I mean, that the plan has literally done, you know, next to nothing. So it's hard to understand how those numbers don't motivate people, especially the council and the mayor. I mean, when you have over 100 deaths of pedestrians, I think you said 1 every 3 days every year, and 4 cigarettes per day just from breathing in LA. I mean, really? I mean, that is pretty obvious we need change. And so I think that I'm gonna bring that change, and I want to bring that change to CD 15.
Very much. Bryant.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Bryant Odega. I'm an LAOZ teacher, Sunrise Movement climate justice organizer, and I've served on the Harbor Gateway South Neighborhood Council, advocating for COVID relief, for also advocating for the LA 2030 climate plan. And I've lived in this district all my life. I'm working class, I'm a renter. My parents are immigrants from Nigeria. My dad was a taxi cab driver, but when I was 7, I forced him to leave the country. Growing up, it was my dad who took me to school. But after our family separation, I started relying on public transportation to get by. I've taken public transit for nearly 15 years throughout District 15. And like many residents, I know what it feels like to take that additional hour of prep time to make it to the bus on time, waiting for almost half an hour in that hot sun due to lack of bus shelters just to get to work or to school or to the grocery store. When it comes to our streets and our public transportation infrastructure, District 15 needs more investments. We get overlooked the most by our governments, and it's time we have access to free and accessible public transportation. I am proud to be the only candidate in this race to have signed on to Streets for All's LA 25 by 25 initiative, because I am 100% committed to taking bold action to make our streets work for everyone. The climate crisis is here. Our district is disproportionately impacted by heavy air pollution. And in order to combat this crisis, we need to invest in alternative forms of public transportation away from cars. We need to make our streets center people, not vehicles. And that's why I support a bold Green New Deal, which would invest and make huge public investments in our public transportation and bus infrastructure. So thank you all for your time. And I look forward to the discussion.
Thanks so much. Danielle?
Hi, good evening. My name is Danielle Sandoval, and I am a parent, a businesswoman, community leader, and a third generation Angelino. I have over a decade of advocacy experience, and I've held LA City Hall accountable, and I've pushed for more transparency. I grew up in Northeast Los Angeles. My family faced social, racial, economic injustices. In 1999, my son's father was shot and killed in the streets of Los Angeles, which then led me to homelessness and living paycheck to paycheck, trying to survive to raise a family. I suffer from food insecurities. And I spent 20 years working in the hospitality industry while trying to be mobile through the city and get to jobs, not having a car and relying on public transportation. I have been fighting for several years for mobility, and as a budget advocate, I have fought for more transparency to implement a lot of these plans that we have been approving over the years, but not actually doing the implementation. I am pushing for more mobility, more public transit, as well as fixing our streets, sidewalks, and adding to our tree canopy in CD15. Thank you.
Much. And Tim.
Thanks very much, Tim McOsker. I am a lifetime resident of the Harbor area, running for City Council, CD15. I come from a family of public service. My father and brothers were LA City firefighters. My form of public service was to come out of law school, and I represented cities as city attorney. I represented a number of different jurisdictions around the county, and then actually came to know Jim Hahn and joined Jim Hahn as the Chief Deputy City Attorney of Los Angeles, and I was Jim Hahn's Chief of Staff in the Mayor's office. And I'm really excited to be here to talk about these mobility issues. I have three sort of experiences that I look back on that I think are going to be applicable to our discussion. When I was with Jim Hahn, we had something called CityStat, where we brought together city departments and had them be more coordinated. And as I was reading through all of these materials on the mobility plan, it occurred to me that we had worked really hard to make sure that DOT and street services worked well so that the striping and the repaving happened at the same time, which is going to be a key component of implementing the mobility plan. Two, when I was in private practice doing land use, I worked with developers quite often, and it was very important that we implemented TDM measures, and particularly in Century City, I had the experience of working on measures that got folks in the city and out of the city and relied less on single occupancy vehicles. We can always do more, but the TDM experience is going to be extraordinarily important for us to take ourselves off of these cars that were meant to be our servant and become our masters. And third, my most recent experience was I was the president of the San Pedro bid, the property owner's bid. And in that experience, we created 16 parklets where we recreated a pedestrian space and a dining space on the street and actually implemented some of the things that we're going to be talking about today. So those are all experiences that I've enjoyed and I look forward to implementing.
All right, we're going to go into candid questions now, and I'm going to turn it over to Katrina for our first question.
Thanks, Michael. Hi, everyone. My name is Katrina, and I'm on the steering committee of Streets for All. This first question is about how we think about transportation. As you think about transportation in Los Angeles, it's obvious that prioritizing cars has been the city's modus operandi for the past 80 years. This is evident in everything from parking minimums to street design. Some say, of course, we prioritize cars. There's no other way to get around LA. Others say that more people don't use the bus because it's slow and inconvenient. It lacks its own lanes. And more people don't bike because they feel like they're going to die or get hurt with the lack of safe bike infrastructure. Mm-hmm. Do you believe the time has come for the city to think differently about transportation? And if so, what do you see yourself doing if elected to change things? First, I'll turn it over to Bryant, followed by Danielle, as indicated at the bottom of this slide.
Yes, that's a great question. So absolutely, it is over time that we design our city differently, especially when it comes to public transportation. As you mentioned before, our city, our streets are designed around people. I mean, you know that there are multiple ways folks, get to a destination, whether it's cycling, whether it's walking, taking public transportation. However, in Los Angeles, especially in District 15, in many cases, it's not viable or not safe. So for example, for myself, in order for me to get to, if I was going to school at Camino in the Harbor Gateway, I'd have to, let's say if I want to take the bus to Harbor City, I would have to cross Western Avenue across almost a 10 lane wide street with a median just to take the bus down south, which is not safe, both for folks like me, but also for folks who have disabilities. And so we need to create safe and secure walk lanes so that folks can get to their bus stops in a safe way. We also need to improve services. But it's also not just about transportation, but also the workers, the folks who run our system as well. We need to pay them a living wage so that we don't lose workers, and we also at the same time improve service as well. And I believe that we should make public transportation free to remove that barrier from working class folks like those in Watts, in which 1 in 5 residents take public transit.
Thanks, Bryant. Next is Danielle.
Thank you. Yes, I think the city should think differently about transportation, but that goes along hand in hand with the developments and creating density. I want to speak specifically about San Pedro. There is a push for more density, but our streets were not made that way. They're small, there's not a lot of parking infrastructure. And with the parklets being in downtown San Pedro, they're taking up about 3 to 4 parking spaces. So they're not looking at the design to when they're bringing in new ideas, new developments, more business, and they're forgetting about our streets. They're forgetting about the mobility aspect. Specifically in the Harbor Gateway, there is more developments there as well. If we're bringing in more people, we do need to think about other options, whether it be bike lanes, wider sidewalks, being ADA compliant. Public transit, is it near and around these developments in our economic corridors? Are the bus routes going, going from point A to point B, not many different routes to get to a destination, a direct line to there? And our district aligns the coast. We should be promoting tourism and creating bike lanes that go along our coast, as well as the infrastructure. So we have bikes where we have the street furniture to put them at.
Thank you. Next is Tim.
Thanks very much. Yes, I do think we need to think about transportation differently. I think we need to put the priority not on just moving more cars and moving them faster, because we know adding lanes is just going to add more cars. I think what we need to get back to is what is safe. Safety needs to be our top priority. And then accessibility or equity needs to be our second priority. And that's, the complete street model, making sure that it's safe for everybody, and also needs to be sustainable. And so really the time has come for us to use what we know about land use and and make sure that as we create density, which is one of the ways to bring down the cost of housing, we need to make sure that we have walkable areas, safe areas, separations in our streets, so that we have the ability, because we're creating density and because we're creating these nodes of jobs and entertainment and dining and shopping and living, that folks can get to their places by walking, by scooter, by bike, and then sometimes by car, because there's going to be folks that need a car. But what we need to do is do smart development and think our way through about how transportation is active transportation as well as passive transportation, and make sure we're balancing the two and creating a sustainable future for our neighborhoods.
Thanks so much. And finally, Anthony.
Yeah, I think the time for change and the time for thinking differently is over. I think it's time to start doing. I mean, we've been talking about a plan for 30 years, not just not just start doing on mobility, but on homelessness, policing, and pollution. I mean, we just need to start action. I mean, There is a plan on the shelf now. It's thoughtful, it's robust. I mean, what isn't thoughtful and robust is the city leadership, and that's what we need to move forward. We need to focus on better transportation, but we also need to focus on better leadership, starting with the mayor and the council office. You know, this is my whole thing, is that we talk and talk and talk and don't do anything. I'm going to include mobility on my list of 15 goals for CD15. And what that is 15 community goals that I want to be measured by when I take over as councilman. I don't want to make a bunch of campaign promises. I want to set goals and accomplishments. And I'm going to have those published each month. I'm going to donate half of my payback if all of those goals aren't met. And of course, they won't be met in the first 4 or 5 or 6 months. But I want people to know that I have skin in the game and that I'm going to be working towards these goals, and mobility will be one of them. Thanks.
Thanks, everyone. I'd like to turn it over to Josh from the steering committee for the next question.
Thanks, Katrina. I'm Josh. I'm on the steering committee. And my question is, as we all know, council members have a huge impact on local transportation solutions, from funding LADOT, potentially sitting on Metro's board, or even spending discretionary funds to implement specific projects. What transportation or street space ideas or changes would you promote in CD15? Feel free to list specific streets or projects. And we're going to start with you, Danielle.
Thank you. So in my district specifically, we have some streets that are very narrow and some that are very wide, and it attracts an unsafe road conditions. I'm speaking mostly about the street racers and takeovers and things like that. So in order to reduce those, as well as beautify our communities, I have advocated for the roundabouts with, having plants there that also help reduce the emissions and clean the air. We have had a lot of pushback with some of these ideas, and because of the red tape in the different departments. So first off, I would start cutting down the red tape. Specifically, let's look in Wilmington along the Avalon corridor, which is the economic corridor. We would add more parking to attract business. The bike lanes that are there, you can't even see them. They're not using them. Now we have big rig trucks coming down the street, and it's unsafe. The street furniture, they're taking it out. So I would like to start implementing and putting back the street furniture, repainting the lines in the street. But the problem is we only have one paint striper. So we need to actually get more so we can expedite these things. There's a lot that needs to be done in the district. And on day one, I will start implementing a lot of the recommendations that have been proposed and in the mobility plan.
Thanks, Danielle. Tim, you're next.
Thanks very much. I'm very, we've found that the parklets and taking back some of the street and creating the pedestrian atmosphere in downtown San Pedro has been very, very effective, and it's been good for business and it's been good for the pedestrian. We also did some traffic calming to slow folks down. And so I like both of those measures, and I'd like to see the same thing actually along Avalon. We've been talking in Avalon about a business improvement district there too, and it's a beautiful street that could have parklets, could have outdoor dining, could have an even greater pedestrian atmosphere. I would like to see that. I would like to see those spaces also greened. I think that would be lovely. As I've been traveling around the district, particularly in residential neighborhoods adjacent to schools, we found a lot of cut-through traffic and speeding. I think it would make sense for us to do traffic calming and have ways of bringing down those speeds with bumps and humps, because it would be safe for the neighborhood. It would also be safe for the children coming in and out of school. I am a proponent of street furniture. I think we need to be equitable about how we have street furniture throughout the entire district. And particularly in Watts, we have a lot of broken curbs and broken streets. And I think that adding street furniture with coverings and making the experience of rapid transit more enjoyable.
Thanks, Tim. Anthony, you're up.
Yeah, I do like the idea of making Avalon a great street, and I worked for 13 years straight down Avalon, so it could be a great street again. What I like the idea of bringing back the red car. It's been talked about forever, and there was a plan to bring it from Wilmington to San Pedro. I think it would make the waterfront, you know, a lot more walkable. It would make it for a car-free and carbon-free experience for people on both the Wilmington and San Pedro waterfronts. But again, it all starts and ends with leadership and accountability and commitment. I mean, we can talk about all these great ideas, but then the thing just gets left on the shelf, and here we are 30 years later with almost nothing done. So, you know, if we're talking about other ideas, I love the idea of scooter pools for kids to take to school, to ride and drop off and keep those parents and adults out of the parking lots and on the streets. You know, there's just so many cars that are just sitting and idling, and you know, so if we can find creative ways to reduce car use and incentivize carpools, you know, get people to use public transportation, but it's not going to happen until people feel safe and clean. You know, when the things are on time, when all the buses and the metro is going to be on time, there's connectivity to actually places we want to go. And so we have to fix the system of getting around before we can make these plans.
Thanks, Anthony. Bryant, you're up.
Yes, absolutely. So as the only candidate in this race to sign on to Street for All's 25 by 25 initiative, I have a bold vision for making our streets accessible to all. In particular, you know, on Vermont Avenue, we need to add BRT, bus rapid transit, so that the rest of the district is connected to the rest of the city via BRT. Vermont in particular is one of the busiest streets in our district, and we should not only have bus lanes from Vermont meets in Harbor Gateway, we should also have that connect us to San Pedro as well. I would also ensure that there are safe but speedier environmental reports done, because we can't have climate justice without transit justice, and we know that both of these policies directly align, especially within the vision of the Green New Deal. In places like Harbor Gateway South, where I live, on Torrance Boulevard and Western Avenue, and other areas up and north of Harbor Gateway, we need to expand the sidewalks so it's safer for folks to actually walk, making it ADA compliant. We also need to invest in speed bumps, especially around our schools, more speed bumps and stop signs to make our streets slower streets, to reduce the incidence of crashes, not accidents, but crashes, because these are human beings who are being impacted. And yeah, those are some of our ideas.
Thanks, Brent. I'm going to hand it over to Adrian.
Thanks, Josh. The Port of Los Angeles handles 20% of all cargo coming into the United States, a huge driver of economic growth for Los Angeles and the region. At the same time, the port is a big source of pollution, including from diesel trucks moving goods from it and from ships docking at it. As council member in CD15, you'd have this incredible asset in your district that is also the source of a ton of environmental pollution, contribution to bad air quality, one of the highest rates of childhood asthma, as well as noise pollution. What is your plan for the Port of Los Angeles, and what ideas do you have to reduce the negative environmental impact from it to surrounding communities in CD15? Metro is currently studying electrifying the Alameda corridor. Would you support this? And we are going to start with Tim.
Yes, I would support electrifying the Alameda corridor. In fact, I think what would make sense for us, and what I've been advocating, is that we have more on-dock rail in the Port of Los Angeles. Right now, about 75% of the goods move out on rubber tire on trucks, and 25% go on dock and into the Alameda corridor. We also know the Alameda corridor is operating at about 50% capacity. And so the opportunity for us to electrify the corridor and to create more on-dock rail gives us the ability then to put more into the corridor, to take more off of the street, and to bring down the emissions. I am an advocate for bringing down the, changing the engines out on trucks, because we will always have trucks, changing the engines and the power systems for the rail system. And also, I think it makes sense for the Port of Los Angeles, and the Port of Los Angeles and Long Beach, by the way, see 40% of all the goods that come into the United States. It makes sense for us to use our market share, to use our power as the most important port in the world, to demand that shipping companies begin creating green shipping lines. And we see on the East Coast that there are plans for green shipping lines. We need to do the same thing on the Pacific Rim. To bring down the emissions of the ships that are coming across the Pacific and delivering those goods. So thank you.
Thank you, Tim. Anthony, you're next.
Yes, I would also agree that we should electrify the Alameda corridor and fully utilize the corridor. But I think for addressing pollution, capturing the emission from ships is critically important. I mean, it's the biggest polluter. It's not the low-hanging fruit, but it's something that's been talked about for 15 years, and we have the technology to do it, and we're not doing it. And then there is a mandate from CARB to capture those emissions, or to plug the ships into electrical power, but it's only an 80% rule. It should be a 100% rule. Shipping lines get under that rule by bringing in different vessel classes, and they get around the rule in various ways. We have the technology and we have the money, so we should do it 100%. The other thing is, we don't demand that the shipping companies take care of the problems that they are creating. They get all the benefits of our community, and they don't give back to the negative impacts. The shipping companies 2 years ago were getting $1,500 a container. Now they're getting in excess of $15,000 a container. They are getting 10 times the amount of money, and we have not seen a dollar of it in the district. We could create a fund that has over $100 million instantly by just charging $4 a container, $2,
Thank you.
$3. Sorry.
Bryant, you're next.
Thank you for that question. So yes, I support electrifying the Alameda corridor. I also believe that not only should we change the engines of our port trucks, but we also must electrify the entire truck fleet. And of course, definitely invest in a charging station to charge our trucks. The record crowd of cargo ships off the coast of Southern California doesn't just make our produce harder to access, but it also spikes huge amounts of dirty exhaust into the air that threatens the health of communities, especially those who are vulnerable living nearby. So in particular in San Pedro and Wilmington, communities who live closest to the port have some of the highest rates of cancer, asthma, and increased risk of miscarriages in all of California. This is an injustice because our district brings in billions of revenue to the city thanks to the port, yet instead of getting resources and services, we are dumped with heavy pollution. So we need to electrify the port, electrify our truck fleet, and also reinvest those dollars into our communities so that we can mediate much of the harms that have been going on in our district for far too long. And it is this issue that motivated me to be involved in the movement for climate justice in the first place. And that's the type of action and vision that I'll bring onto the City Council.
Thanks, Brian. Danielle, you're next.
Thank you. So this issue actually impacts me directly. My family are port workers, and my father-in-law actually passed because of health conditions from working in the port. It's also affected my son, where he has had health issues when he was younger as well because of the poor air quality. So let's call it what it is. Expanding rail in the port will gentrify Wilmington altogether. We already have the expansion of the Alameda corridor, and because they don't want to fix the infrastructure, they are now driving through the community. They are also allowing trucking companies to set up shop right next to homes. where they're idling and using machinery 24 hours a day next to someone's bedroom. That's a death sentence. People, it has proven fact that people who live in these industrial areas have do not live as long. And that is what's happening in our community, and it's unacceptable. The port needs to be held accountable. We do have to electrify the port, the rails, and the machinery that is also in the port, and that these workers are using 24/7 and we are breathing in as well. It is unacceptable. The port is not a good neighbor, and they need to be held accountable and start reinvesting into our communities to fix these situations.
Thank you. I think I'm next. So riding a bike or scooter is dangerous in CD15. Around the district, people who depend on bikes or scooters to get around navigate a patchwork of unprotected bike lanes that are often in the door zone of parked cars or around delivery drivers idling at curbs. The mobility plan includes 22 miles of protected bike lanes in the district, but only 1.4 miles have been built, which is about 6%. The plan includes protected bike lanes on Imperial Highway, Central Vermont, 190th, Western, Anaheim, Gaffey, Palos Verdes North, South Harbor Boulevard, and West 25th Street. So the question is, will you commit to implementing a network of safe, physically protected bike lanes in CD15, even if car space has to be taken to make room for them? And how will you deal with pushback from Angelinos that don't want to give up car space and can never see themselves on a bike? And for this one, we're going to start with Anthony.
Okay, well, I think you touched on, I think safety is the key. I mean, safe physical protection of bike lanes it is a great idea, and we have to do it where possible, but we have to make sure they're safe for people of all ages. I mean, 7 to 77. I mean, we live in a place that's mostly flat, like you said, that's almost always sunny. I mean, it makes sense to have an expanded bike system. I would implement it where it's going to be successful, so people can see the success and then want to implement it further in their neighborhood or their community. There's certainly communities that it's just not going to work, I think, and I don't want to put a square peg in a round hole and just try to hammer something into the community where the locals don't want it. I think it has to be, you have to get a lot of community feedback and buy-in. But I think there's always going to be initial resistance with some of these things, but if we can see successes and people see people using it, then I think we can further develop it and create this system. One of the difficulties of having all these are not having space for bikes is that they're not contemplated when we're doing development. So we need to make sure that developers are contemplating all of these things and making them pay for those type of improvements.
Thank you. Bryant.
Yes, so I will commit to enacting a strong bike network throughout the district. In particular, our plan for bike lanes also includes creating bike lanes around all parks in CD15 in the most densely populated neighborhood in our district and also across the city, Watts. About 30% of residents use other means of transportation besides cars. At Ted Watkins Park, which is one of the notable parks in Watts, there's only one bike lane on the shortest side of the park. And only the part on Central has a bike lane as well. And it's injustice because this is such a small piece of bike lane infrastructure, yet this is one of the most important community centers in the neighborhood. And so we would enact a bike lane all across the district, around parks, in terms of dealing with pushback from Angelinos. With change, there's always bound to be some pushback. And part of that involves leadership, because the climate crisis is here and we do need to take bold climate action in order to avert climate catastrophe, and that includes investing in bike infrastructure. And so I'll work with communities, doing town halls, doing community deep canvases through the lens of an organizer to do public education and get community buy-in for these policies.
Thank you. Danielle?
Thank you. So number one, they do have to be safe, but they have to make sense. Where are they going? There's a lot of bike lanes that lead to nowhere. And especially in our district, we have high traffic. We have the cargo going in and out of the port. We have the long lines of trucks that are just sitting and idling. And having a bike lane there with somebody, you know, riding their bike in traffic, you're now inhaling all the toxins that are the emissions that are coming from these cars. So we need to think sensibility. They need to be around parks, schools, commercial corridors where we have a robust local economy. You're right. People don't want to give up car spaces for bikes. We need to have them dedicated, but also at night, they need to be visible. We need better street lighting and on our streets so you can see them. At night, you can't even see the bike lanes, and it's really difficult to see the bike riders when they're riding. And that also poses a safety issue. My daughter was hit riding her bike to school on Western, and it's a high traffic area. The signals we don't have left turning lanes, and cars are rushing in the morning. They're rushing in the afternoon. They're trying to get to their destination, and they are not looking at the pedestrians. So these bike lanes need to make sense on where they're going and where they are in order to keep the public safe.
Tim?
Yes, I will commit to implementing a network of safe, we've all said safe, physically protected bike lanes. I mean, the idea of physical protection means that we need to take back some of the space of the street. And that what does put us in conflict with the car. It just does. And we need to do a couple of things. One is we need to be smart about our development as we're making land use decisions. These land use decisions need to consider, you know, how we are setting up the infrastructure or redesignating the infrastructure around the projects. I also think from the pushback, which is certain, I think what's important to do is what your organization does. Tell the compelling stories. We have to tell the stories of why this is important. For example, my wife very often bikes to work. It's just a couple of miles, but she has to navigate Gaffey to get to work. And it makes me very, very nervous. And I think we all need to understand the importance of being able to give active commuters, active transportation users, the opportunity to be as safe and to have the same rights as folks who are in their vehicles on these roads. I think it will be very important for us, in fact, to not only have work with in the land use sphere, but we also need to make sure that we're educating the rest of our our enforcement officers and our community to know that folks have rights in the street.
Over to Olga.
Thank you, Michael. So we have an epidemic of traffic violence in our city. On average, we know a pedestrian is killed once every 3 days, a rate that's 4 times the national average. In the past 2 weeks, we've seen 3 cyclists murdered by drivers. We don't just have dangerous streets because we have a big city. Our big city is especially dangerous compared to other big cities in the country. How will you work with LADOT to accelerate Vision Zero infrastructure implementation? Mayor Garcetti recently released a budget that proposes a decrease in Vision Zero funding. Do you agree with his funding priorities, and how will you ensure LADOT has the funding needed to address the high injury network in CD15? Oh, sorry, we'll start with Bryant.
Thank you for that question. So I disagree with Mayor Garcetti's funding priorities. We must increase funding for Vision Zero infrastructure. Our streets are only as safe as they are designed for our most vulnerable residents, children, the elderly, people with different abilities. And so, since 2021, there's been at least 294 car collision deaths, killing a 24% increase from the previous year. This is an injustice. And so I would increase more funding for Vision Zero infrastructure to make our streets safer for all people, and also including reallocating some funds from policing into public transportation as well, because we also need to make sure that our public transit is also free, remove that barrier of costs away from vulnerable communities who disproportionately rely on public transportation. We also need to have more protected lanes so that we don't have these random bike lanes in certain places that that increases the risk of these collisions. And so overall, that is our position, our platform regarding Vision Zero.
Okay.
Oh, sorry. Next is Danielle.
Hi, thank you. Actually, yes, Mayor Garcetti just released his proposed budget, but we still have a chance to overturn that with budget and finance hearings are going on. And I urge everybody to do public comment. But if that doesn't happen, as a seasoned budget advocate, there are other areas where we can pull money from and allocations. When we pass the budget, it's always moving. So there are opportunities. And when I'm there in office, I will be able to pull, because I've already identified where some of our monies can be pulled from to fund the cuts, the budget cuts, if this does happen. And one of them is because we do have a lot of pedestrian incidences, it raises our liabilities. So by investing in better infrastructure and safe, we'll actually reduce the cost of settlements and litigation and liabilities. Therefore, there is also money there, about $10 million that can be moved right now back into this budget item. And on first day, that's exactly what I do, is review the budget, look for those items and propose it in budget and finance, and eventually move it on to city council for approval. So we will have the equitable funding throughout for all of the mobility plans and start implementing portions of the mobility plan 2035 immediately.
Up next, we have Tim.
Thanks very much. The city made a commitment on Vision Zero and is not keeping its commitment. In fact, the numbers have gone in the wrong direction. These murders and deaths are up, injuries are up. So I do not agree that this is the time to cut that funding. In fact, as a council member, any one of us would have the responsibility to make good on that commitment and advocate for additional funding, whether it comes in the direct allocation or is money that is moved. I think it'd also be important for us to work with LADOT to look how we can leverage the general fund dollars with state, federal, and regional dollars to increase the protected infrastructure for bicyclists and others who are entitled to the street. Also, I think it'd be very important for us to make sure that we are spending money on education, that we are getting the message out to everyone in the community about how important it is to adhere to and advance the safety measures in our shared right of way. And so I'm disappointed to see a proposed decrease. I'm hopeful, in fact, that the city council will reallocate that money, and I will be prepared to find that money. Thank you.
Thank you. And lastly, we have Anthony.
Yeah, not surprisingly, I agree with most of what has been said. I am also disappointed that there would be a decrease in funding. I don't agree with Bryant that we should maybe take it from police funding, but I do agree that that needs to be fully funded, and I hope the city council actually does their job and sends that back and makes sure that the mayor sticks to the commitments that he made. I like the idea of accessing federal dollars to help make some help with the budget and for budget shortfalls. But I hate to see this when an outgoing mayor is doing something when that really is really in direct conflict with what he promised. And again, this is what happens when people get to City Hall. and they forget about their commitments. And that's something that I will not do. And that's why I want my office to be ground zero for accountability and common sense. And that's what I commit to do when I am the council member.
Thank you, Anthony. I'm going to hand it over to Katrina.
Thanks, Olga. This next question is about traffic enforcement. The city is currently studying moving traffic enforcement away from the LAPD to LADOT to reduce pretextual stops and potential escalation by armed officers. These disproportionately impact people of color. There's also 2 bills in Sacramento legalizing speed cameras and noise cameras this legislative session. What is your vision for the balance of personnel and technology in traffic enforcement? And what do you see as the best future model for safe and equitable enforcement in the future? First is Danielle for this question.
Thank you. I know some time ago we were fighting these traffic lights because they're inaccurate, and we had a lot of costs that was settled in litigation. It's also part of the risk management portions I was speaking of earlier. We need to also, before we start looking at contracting or putting these cameras into use, there is a component of racial profiling, which I have been a victim of, and I know others, several of us have been victims of racial profiling, but also everyday people who live paycheck to paycheck. Once you get one of these tickets, it's costly. It comes out of your fixed budget, and then it turns into additional costs. I don't think that having these lights and more infrastructure near anywhere is sensible thinking. I think it's laziness. I think it's not being accountable for what actually needs to be done. And we forget that it is also a mental health issue. When you receive one of these tickets and you have to go to court, you have to take a day out of your schedule. You have to, not go to work that day, lose pay. It's just, we cannot, I do not support this. I don't support it. I support that we actually go back and do our original plan, not think of something new to implement. And it's just lazy and not sensible thinking. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Tim.
Thanks very much. Yes, there was a period of time where technology and traffic enforcement was used and challenged, and there were a lot of problems with not only the technology, but I think the biggest problem was that it was also contracted out to third parties. And so it was the city authorizing a third party to enforce a model of enforcement. And it not only created a new layer of additional expense and cost, but also there was no responsibility, there was no ownership by the local jurisdiction of this enforcement mechanism. So I am completely opposed to that. As we look at technology in traffic enforcement, I would want us to adhere to the city owning it, owning responsibility for it, making sure that it is accurate and that it is equitable. Now, going to the issue of equity, pretextual stops and racial profiling is unconstitutional and should never, ever be allowed. And we should push back against that. There may be some way that using technology in traffic enforcement and taking traffic enforcement measures away from police officers will have the effect of creating greater equity. And I would be open to reviewing that. But again, we would need the city actors, the council members, to be responsible for implementation and have the buck stop at their desk.
Thanks, Tim. Next is Anthony.
Yeah, I think there are better ways to enforce traffic than using cameras. I mean, I agree. I think it's just lazy. I don't think that it helps anyone. I think what happens is, as we've seen in the past, some of those end up being no bid contracts to friends of people within the city who make millions of dollars because it's third party out. I do like the idea of having non-sworn officers or non-sworn workers enforcing parking violations, getting cops off the streets from getting them away from writing tickets and having them do things that really help support crime prevention. I think racial profiling, I think we all agree, is outrageous and shouldn't happen. I think there's more training that needs to be done with police officers in that vein. But again, that's something that I would really oppose, is any expansion of traffic control by cameras that are just issuing tickets and quite often to people who can't afford them and need that money for families and honestly in this time to just put food on their table and to buy gasoline. So no, not in favor of that at all.
Thank you. Finally, Bryant.
So I don't think we should use technology, put more resources towards technology to further in traffic enforcement. Traffic enforcement is another form of taxing poverty because those who are disproportionately impacted tend to come from communities that have the least amount of, street safety, street infrastructure. And I know what it feels like as a Black person, jaywalking across the street with my friends and being stopped by a police officer. How does that keep us safe? It doesn't. It further traumatizes those who need the most care, especially since it is the city who is responsible for the way our streets are designed, forcing folks into those type of decisions. I support investing those resources instead to make transportation safer. Investing in equitable transit access by bringing back things like free metro and looking at other cities for examples like in Atlanta, Georgia, where they turned defunct train tracks into protected bike lanes, paths and trails that actually separate from cars that make you feel safe, that aren't only safe, but also make you feel safe. And this is called the Beltline, which goes across that entire city. Los Angeles can actually qualify for these rails to trails, federal government grants to implement solutions like this right here. In terms of the safest way to enforce traffic, we can have train workers at station booths and cross guards at schools and parks instead of folks with weapons and gadgets and guns.
Thanks. I'll turn it back over to Michael for the last question.
Thanks, Katrina. If we can, let's try to do this in less than 90 seconds each because there's a ton of audience questions. I want to make sure we get to as many as possible. So this question is about congestion pricing. Metro is currently studying congestion pricing for Los Angeles County, considering charging cars for access to routes that could be easily accessed by transit in an attempt to incentivize transit usage. The study currently includes things like charging cars to enter downtown LA, for example. And in cities around the world that have implemented congestion pricing, transit usage has gone up and car usage has gone down, helping to clean the air and make the streets safer. So the question is, as a potential Metro board member, your voice would be important in this conversation. Would you support congestion pricing in Los Angeles? And we'll start with Tim.
The short answer, as you asked, is yes. I would consider and support congestion pricing, but I would want to make sure that we are considering those folks who need to drive and have fewer resources. I want to make sure that this is equitable. We have circumstances where folks, essential workers, need to be at work, and if they don't have access to mass transit and need to drive in, I want to make sure that there are opportunities, there are safeguards to make sure that this is not just a regressive tax on folks that are cleaning buildings, that are doing security. But generally, yes, I would support congestion pricing in Los Angeles to actually put the actual price on driving a car into a place like downtown on the consumer.
Thank you. Anthony.
Yeah, I think I have a bit of a problem with it. It's I really don't support the model. I think it's a matter of equity and equality. And honestly, from what I've read, it doesn't really work for Los Angeles. If workability was the only issue, it really works better in more densely populated areas like New York or London. LA is just not laid out that way geographically. It's not suited to work real well. But, you know, I think it's more of a social issue to it. It just kind of furthers the divide between the haves and the have-nots, telling someone that their time is less valuable because they don't have 20 bucks to jump out of traffic. I'm not sure that helps the city. There needs to be a better solution than that. So, you know, no, I have a problem with it.
Thank you. Bryant?
So as a potential board member, you know, my position on congestion pricing in Los Angeles is I support it. However, a more progressive approach to pricing it, so that's tied to wages and income, so that it is more equitable, so that folks who are at a lower income scale don't pay more than they can afford, to make it, you know, equitable for all. You know, a speeding ticket for a billionaire would be much more expensive than, say, for a low-income person. And so the effect of the fine may feel the same for both, but the impact would not. I also support this because this is very important to reduce congestion, because, you know, it helps reduce traffic, but it's also good for the climate as well. You know, Los Angeles has already gone over the temperature that climate scientists says it is extreme for the planet, and so we need to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, reduce the pollution, our air quality by finding multiple ways of reducing car congestion. And so congestion pricing is definitely one of them that I support, but must be priced via an equitable way tied to your wages and income class level.
Thank you. Danielle?
Thank you. So we started off the conversation with the mobility plan and how it's not being implemented. There's a lot of plans and ideas that the city council comes up with, and they start out with good intentions and they look great on paper, but then it always comes back to haunt us, and then we can't get the plan out. Look, I look at this as another form of redlining. That's exactly what it is. And if we jump into something that looks great on paper, it will, in the end, I guarantee you, it may hurt us. And I do not support something that I have not seen to be effective and proven to be a great plan. I think there needs to have more discussion on this. I don't support anything that would hurt anyone throughout the city. I have a daughter who is in college. And I know for a fact, if she had to get to school or get to somewhere in downtown Los Angeles, she cannot afford it. She makes minimum wage and she pays for books and she pays for her schooling. I know that there's single mothers out there that have a car and have to put gas in, and then now having to be taxed to go through a high traffic area. I cannot allow a plan that will financially hurt somebody else's quality of life and financial that they have to put food on their table. I'm not on board with that. I'm sorry, especially not in having more details.
Thank you. Okay. Let's go to the first audience question. And Anthony, you'll be up first. The LA Times recently wrote an article about how sheriffs disproportionately stop cyclists of color for infractions. It is currently illegal to ride on the sidewalk in unincorporated LA County, which surrounds CD 15. How do you plan to legalize bike riding and get rid of police stops of cyclists? And just a point of clarification, it is legal to ride a bike on the sidewalk in the city of Los Angeles, but not in unincorporated county. So Anthony, go for it, up to 1 minute.
Well, I mean, I think we should just make that a uniform law. I mean, it's going to be confusing for the cyclists as well. I mean, because I know in San Pedro, you can be on a county street and a city street within just seconds of each other. So, I mean, you know, there has to be some common sense around it. There has to be some thought behind it. Again, that's kind of my thing. We have to approach all of these issues with common sense, with accountability, with things that work. And we really need community buy-in when we decide we're going to make changes to things that are going to affect the way people get around or people live their lives, or they're going to actually have an effect in their neighborhoods. And so that's really what I want to bring is just a common sense approach, and then also an approach that gets things done, not just
Thank you.
The city or the county making an arbitrary.
Thank you, Anthony. And I just want to remind everybody, there's a lot of questions, so up to 1 minute, but don't feel free to use less. Let's go to Bryant.
So since the LA Sheriff's Department is using traffic citations to target and criminalize bicycle commuters of color, because if you also look at the data of the folks who do get stopped, it is folks who are Latino, it is folks who are Black, and they also happen to be working class as well. And so it's an issue that affects communities that are most vulnerable, to have the least amount of infrastructure for bikes. And so I plan to eliminate traffic citations for bicycle riders on sidewalks in the district, since they are forced to ride on a sidewalk because of our streets not being safe currently. Because I know I wouldn't be riding on the streets the way they are right now. We also need to expand metro bike stations so that everyone can have access to quality public transit no matter what part of LA you are in. Furthermore, we also need more public spaces for walking and bikes, since that improves the quality of life in neighborhoods and will thus reduce the incidence of traffic citations as well and keep us all safe.
Danielle?
Thank you. So as I mentioned earlier, my daughter, when she was hit, she was driving from on the street to the sidewalk because of the amount of traffic that was coming on, on Western, as well as the amount of children that were walking on the sidewalk. And it was just, there's no bike lanes. So because she happened to ride on a sidewalk and receives a ticket, I think it's unacceptable. I would eliminate all of that because there are reasons why people do ride on the sidewalks, but they have to also respect the pedestrians that are also walking, as well as mothers who are pushing their children in the stroller, and those who require aid as far as wheelchairs and walkers. They need to also respect those pedestrians as well. It has to be safe for all. And expanding some of these bike lanes, again, near and around schools, parks, and our economic corridors, I think is sensible, but removing the ticketing.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Pretextual stop and racial profiling is illegal. It's criminal activity, unconstitutional. And when it happens in the sheriff's office, it's something we can use our bully pulpit to call out and to condemn. We need to also show in the city of Los Angeles that we are training and making sure that it does not happen here. A quick story, a friend of ours, a friend of mine in Compton and Watts, John Jones of the East Side Riders, has a riding club for exactly this reason. His experience of Black and brown kids getting pulled over, and so they ride to educate, they ride for health. And I would say that we need training on cops, we need good policies, and we also need to get on our bikes and ride.
Thank you. Next question. How do you view the relationship between housing and transit? Bryant, you're up.
So the relationship between housing and transit are directly linked. We need to increase transportation infrastructure around residential areas so that it's easier for folks to walk, and access public transit to get to work and other places of destination. We also need to build more true affordable housing that's actually affordable for those local neighborhoods to reduce the overcrowding that's currently happening in places like Harbor Gateway and Watts and other neighborhoods. I also support, in addition to this, because we also need to prevent gentrification, which is currently happening to our district. We need to strengthen renter protections. As the only renter in this race and the only renter who will be on the LA City Council, I support a strong Tenants' Bill of Rights, which would prevent anti-landlord harassment, which would expand rent control, stabilize the rent, and also include a free right to free legal counsel.
Neil? You're on mute.
Something's going on with my audio. It was spotty. Can you repeat the question, please?
The question is, how do you view the relationship between housing and transit?
Thank you. So yes, housing and transit. In our plan for affordable housing, we need to, of course, increase transit so those folks can actually go to markets and whatnot, destinations, and it needs to also be affordable as well as for our students. Our students are attending college, they're going to school, and we need to expand them, and they need to be direct routes to get there. Also extending the times that they are available at night. There's less buses that are running at night, and the adequate lighting near and around those areas as well, and more bus shelters to ensure safety and the weather elements.
Tim?
It's a symbiotic relationship. Great transit creates affordable housing, and great housing and affordable housing needs to be built around transit. This is the relationship. We need to make sure that as we're building the kind of density and the kind of housing that is affordable, that we have good options for first and last mile. We need to make sure that we have rapid transit. We need to make sure that we have opportunities for active transportation in and out of those facilities. And so they are intimately related. It's all about smart development and smart growth. Thanks.
Anthony? You're on mute.
Okay. Yeah, no, I agree. It's about smart development. It's about creating, like you said in the beginning, there's most of the trips are within 3 or 4 miles, so it makes sense to have housing around development, but we have to be thoughtful about those development projects. And we really have to be thoughtful about the developers and the developers' relationships with council members and with the mayor's office. I mean, that's all of the problems that you see that come out of the council office always seem to, there's always orbiting around our developers. And so I think we need to do it smart. We need to make housing and transportation, like Tim said, a symbiotic relationship, but we also need to be very careful with those relationships in the council and in the mayor's office.
Okay, this may be our last one. We'll see how it goes. The question is, when was the last time you used public transportation in CD15? And I'll add one more thing. If elected, would you commit to using public transportation on a regular basis? Because often the people making decisions about public transportation aren't necessarily the riders of public transportation. So that was my caveat, but the person's question was, when was the last time you used public transportation in CD15? Danielle.
I was just talking about this today, the last time I rode public transportation. It's been a while, I would say since RTD, which is very telling of my age, but I have been advocating for light rail to connect directly to downtown LA. And I am a strong advocate for more public transportation to downtown LA to go to a Dodger game or to go to City Hall. Yes, I am 100% in favor. It would save me in gas, number one. Gas prices are way too high. And we do need more of a direct connect. If we do want to take light rail, we have to go into our neighboring city, which is Long Beach. And I am a strong advocate for more public transit, and I would absolutely utilize it.
Tim?
This morning. A friend of mine gave me a brochure on Athens on the Hill about all the beautiful homes there, and I thought it'd be fun to go up and see. And so I actually drove up in a Chevy Bolt, and my wife we commuted together. My wife took the car to her next appointment and left me off, and I had a chance to wander around. And then when I was done, I took the green line over to the silver line and took the silver line to 7th and Pacific, about 2 blocks away from my campaign office. It was a great experience. We have a silver line that goes from downtown San Pedro to downtown LA. It connects the harbor to Watts, it connects our district. And yes, it was a great experience. And I think it's something that I would like to do on a regular basis when I'm on council.
Anthony?
That was spoken like a true politician. Well, I want to know the time you did it before that. And you don't have to answer. No, look, I live just minutes from the port. So, and I've been working in the port for more than 20 years. So I haven't been on public transportation in a while. I'm fortunate enough to just only have to, never have to really get on a freeway. So that's something that probably has saved years off of my life. I'd probably look older than I already do if I had to jump on the freeway and make my way down. But if I am fortunate enough to be elected and I have to go downtown, I will definitely use public transportation, and I will make sure that the experience is better for everyone that's using it now.
Thank you. And Bryant.
All right. So in terms of technically most recent time I took public transit was last year when it was free. And I remember how liberating that was. Took it to get a haircut in Harbor City. But in terms of actively using public transportation, the last year was 2019, toward the end of 2019. So I've used it for 15 years since I was 7, from elementary, middle school to high school and community college. But I had to stop taking public transit in 2019. I transferred to UCLA and I took the bus one time north, and it took me 2.5 hours to get to campus. And it's just that type of sacrifice that folks over here in the Harbor and South LA region have to sacrifice in order to get to West LA or to downtown is an injustice. And so on City Council, I would commit to taking public transportation again, but I would also make sure that all folks are able to take public transit as well in a way that's feasible and equitable for all.
All right, I'm going to try to do one more question, but if we could do like 30 seconds, that would be great, because I want to make sure everyone has enough time for their closing statements. So there's a lot of questions in here about the role of police in public transit, and I wanted to give you guys a chance to respond to it. So I'm going to sort of combine 2 questions. The first one is, one of the most prominent police killings in our area was by Long Beach PD at a metro stop. How do you plan to handle the role of police in public transportation? And another person asked, will you commit to moving police from metro and removing police from metro and implementing non-police public safety measures on our public transit? Tim, start with you.
Yes, I would be very interested in moving police off of metro and having non-sworn public safety. And I think that it would be an important thing to investigate, make sure that we have a safe system, but there are ways to make a safe system without sworn officers.
Thank you. Anthony?
Yeah, I would use unarmed safety officers and utilize those police resources in a much better way to prevent crime.
Thank you. Bryant?
So working class Black and brown folks disproportionately use transit, but are also disproportionately impacted by these pretextual stops and police racial profiling. Our campaign doesn't take a dime and cop money, and we're proud to also now receive the support of the LAPPL. I would move resources towards unarmed public safety officers, such as metro workers and cross guards, so that we can create a public transit system that's actually safe and just for all people.
Thank you. And Danielle?
Thank you. Look, police does not solve every single issue that we have. We have to stop with putting police everywhere. We have police policing the homeless. We have police wearing are armed on our parks, in our schools, on transit. Like police, people who are armed is not the answer. Let's stop it. We need real solutions. Real solutions. We need them now. We cannot, the answer is not more police. I'm not in favor.
Thank you. All right. Unfortunately, there were a lot more questions, but we did our best. We'll now go to closing statements. Bryant, you're up first.
Right. So I've lived in this district all my life. As I mentioned before, I'm a proud son of immigrants, but what got me into politics isn't the connections or the wealth that I have, but more so the issues. I realized that living next door to two warehouses and a factory wasn't a norm or natural phenomenon, but more so the consequences of policymakers making decisions, sacrificing my communities for the sake of corporate profit. District 15 is one of the most heavily industrialized districts in the city, has also some of the highest rates of pollution in the city as well, resulting in high rates of asthma, cancer, and miscarriages. This is what got me into Sunrise Movement. We need to take bold climate action to not only hold the fossil fuel industry accountable, who are accountable the most for this crisis, but also to remediate and provide restorative justice for the communities who have been disproportionately impacted. And that includes transit policy. Climate justice is transit justice. We need to invest in making transit equitable and accessible for all peoples, regardless of zip code, income, and physical abilities. We need to double the 2,500 clean fuel bus fleet from 2,500 to 5,000. And we also need to enact the LA 25 by 25 initiative. And I'm proud to be the only candidate in this race to do so. We need to repurpose at least 25 of our streets into creating more safe and secure bike lanes, walk lanes, bus lanes, investing in bus shelters, making our streets safer, more stop signs, speed bumps, so that our streets are safe for all, and that access to the road is a right that is guaranteed and also protected as well. We're endorsed by Sunrise LA, Youth Climate Strike LA, Communities for a Better Environment, and more. And if you want to support our movement for climate justice, I'll drop my info in the chat.
Thank you. Danielle?
Thank you. Look, I'm not a politician. I'm a problem solver, and that's what we need. We need to stop electing these career politicians who have old policies, old ideas with no solutions. It's just throwing more money at it. That's not me. I've been in the community advocating, listening to the constituents, actually walking in the shoes of everyday people. I've been a renter. I've been a homeowner. I've been a business owner. I have walked in everyday shoes of everybody, all folks everywhere, okay? I have proven to show my solutions. I put in a sidewalk in San Pedro. I helped put in a skate park in Harbor City. We implemented a community garden in Harbor City that has not been completed, by the way. A great idea, but the city's saying we have no funding for it. This is happening over and over and over, and it's been happening for decades, but now they're spending our tax dollars to fail. It's time that we stop. You need someone who has a solution. That's me. That's why I'm different. And I think everyone who has helped contributed to all of the successes, like in Harbor City, like in Wilmington, like in San Pedro, that has proven, because I have united, I have built coalitions, and we have succeeded. Now to take it to another step. Now is to actually change what our district looks like so it's more equitable. And in order to do that, we have to stop electing the status quo. We have to stop electing these people who have no solutions, just more taxes for their own pockets. That's why I'm different. And I have proven this throughout my platform. I've been saying it since day one. And I'm hearing it echoed with all the candidates now. Thank you for your support.
Thank you. Tim?
Thanks everybody for this discussion. This has been great. I've really enjoyed it. I think I want to come back to the sort of our anchors here. It's really going to be extraordinarily important for us to make sure that our transportation system, all of our infrastructure, our mobility plans are safe. Safety, accessible, equitable throughout the entire district, which means, Watts, the Gateway, Harbor City, Wilmington, San Pedro, that we have equity throughout the district on our improvements. And it is important that we implement the mobility plan to be sustainable. We know that getting cars off the road, changing engines, creating more active pedestrian opportunities, making our city walkable and bikeable, and putting jobs close to living is going to be the way to sustain the planet in the future. And in CD15, we also have the great opportunity to green the port and changing the engines and changing the way that we move goods and making sure that we are protecting the economic engine of the port and protecting jobs, but also bringing down emissions will be the way to make CD15's contribution to a sustainable Earth achievable. So thanks very much for having me. I've really enjoyed the discussion.
Being here. Anthony, you get the last word.
Okay. Well, thank you for hosting the debate and including me in the forum. You know, I think I just want to say I really feel like people have, you know, they've lost faith in the leadership of the city, and you know, it's our officials are failing us on quality of life issues that are important to all of us, and so we have to look for change and innovative ideas. On the mobility plan, we're never going to get to a fully utilizing a bus system until we know that it's safe, or the metro system until it's safe, clean, you know, there's connectivity, it's efficient, and it's on time. And I think those are the things that we need to be committed to when it comes to mobility. I hate to see the same old, you know, kind of cronies and phonies that get recycled at City Hall, and we end up with the same type of leadership and the same type of tired solutions. And you've seen what happens. You presented the statistics, you know, 30 years and almost nothing done in this plan. And what does that say when, you know, you showed us that people were dying at 1 per every 3 days? I mean, in one administration, that's over 400 deaths. And the mayor's office and the council districts, they don't want to attack that problem. I just find it appalling. I mean, we need people that are going to get in there and actually do something. The time to do something is now. We need change, and I'm the one who's going to bring it.
Thank you very much. Well, these topics aren't always talked about in campaigns. And so we're really grateful for your guys' attendance tonight, for the conversation, and for being here. And this is our very last candidate mobility debate before the primaries. So we encourage everyone, no matter who you vote for, just make sure you vote and participate. And I want to thank everyone again for being here. Good night, everybody.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.